You won't believe what happened in this courtroom. After 3 hours of testimony, shocking evidence, and explosive accusations, Judge Patricia Holloway did something no one expected. She stopped. She looked at both parties. And then she said the words that left everyone speechless. "I cannot announce my verdict today." The courtroom fell into chaos. The plaintiff's family gasped. The defendant's mother collapsed into tears. And everyone watching wondered the same thing. What could possibly make a veteran judge with 23 years on the bench refuse to deliver justice? This is the story of Marcus Webb, a 47-year-old construction foreman from Millbrook, Tennessee. A man with no criminal record. A man who coached Little League for 12 years. A man who everyone in his neighborhood called the nicest guy on the block. But on the night of September 14th, Marcus Webb was accused of something that could destroy everything he had built. Aggravated assault. The alleged victim? 24-year-old Derek Simmons, the boyfriend of Marcus's only daughter, Leah. And here's where this story gets complicated. Because what happened that night wasn't just about fists and fury. It was about a father's love, a daughter's silence, and secrets that were buried so deep they almost never came to light. Let me take you back to where it all began. Marcus Webb had raised Leah on his own since she was 6 years old. His wife, Denise, passed away from cancer, leaving Marcus to be both mother and father to their little girl. And by all accounts, he did an incredible job. Leah graduated top of her class. She earned a scholarship to nursing school. She was kind, compassionate, and everyone who knew her said she had her mother's smile. When Leah turned 22, she met Derek Simmons at a coffee shop downtown. Derek was charming, handsome. He had a good job at a marketing firm and drove a nice car. Marcus was hesitant at first, the way any father would be, but Leah seemed happy. And that's all Marcus ever wanted for his daughter. But 6 months into the relationship, things started to change. Leah stopped coming to Sunday dinners. She stopped answering her phone. When Marcus did see her, she seemed distant, nervous, like she was always looking over her shoulder. He asked her multiple times if everything was okay. And every single time, Leah smiled and said, "I'm fine, Dad. Just busy with school." Marcus wanted to believe her. He really did. Then came the night of September 14th. It was around 11:30 when Marcus got a phone call that made his blood run cold. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from the apartment. Leah shared with Derek. Mrs. Patterson was crying so hard Marcus could barely understand her. But through the sobs, he heard 4 words that changed everything. "He's hurting your daughter." Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't call the police. He didn't think. He just grabbed his keys and drove. 23 minutes later, he was standing outside Leah's apartment door. And what he heard from inside made his heart shatter into a million pieces. Screaming, crying. The sound of glass breaking. Marcus pounded on the door. No answer. He pounded again. Still nothing. And then he heard Leah's voice, weak and terrified, crying out for help. What happened next would become the center of this entire case. Marcus kicked in the door. He found Derek standing over Leah, who was curled up on the kitchen floor with blood running down her face. According to Marcus's testimony, Derek turned and lunged at him. Marcus defended himself. And in the process, Derek suffered a broken nose, 2 fractured ribs, and a severe concussion. Derek was hospitalized for 3 days. And 2 weeks later, Derek filed assault charges against Marcus Webb. Now, you might be thinking this is an open and shut case of self-defense. A father protecting his daughter from her abuser. Case dismissed, right? But here's where it gets complicated. Derek had a different story. A very different story. According to Derek, he and Leah had gotten into a verbal argument that night. Nothing physical. He claimed Leah had been drinking and accidentally fell, hitting her head on the counter. He said Marcus burst in like a madman and attacked him without provocation. Derek's attorney painted Marcus as an overprotective father who had never approved of the relationship, a man looking for any excuse to get rid of his daughter's boyfriend. And the evidence? The evidence was murky at best. There were no witnesses inside the apartment. Mrs. Patterson had only heard noises from outside. The medical records showed Leah had injuries consistent with a fall, but they could also be consistent with assault. And here's the detail that made everyone's stomach turn. Leah refused to testify against Derek. She refused to say a single word about what really happened that night. When Leah took the stand, the entire courtroom held its breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. This was the moment Leah could save her father or condemn him. The plaintiff's attorney approached her slowly. "Miss Webb, can you tell the court exactly what happened on the night of September 14th? Leah sat there, trembling. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked at her father, then at Derek, then down at her hands. "I fell," she whispered. "It was an accident." The courtroom erupted. Marcus's face went pale. His attorney tried to object, but there was nothing to object to. Leah was telling her story, and her story didn't match her father's. Derek's attorney smiled like a cat who had just caught the canary. "So your father attacked Mr. Simmons unprovoked, correct?" Leah's chin quivered. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't know. I was on the floor. I didn't see everything." "But you're saying Mr. Simmons never touched you?" The silence that followed was deafening. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Finally, Leah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember." Now, here's what you need to understand about victims of domestic abuse. Many of them never speak out. They're scared. They're manipulated. They've been told that if they say anything, things will only get worse. And looking at Leah on that stand, anyone with eyes could see she was terrified. But fear isn't evidence. And in a court of law, feelings don't determine guilt or innocence. Facts do. Marcus's attorney did everything he could to paint the full picture. He called character witnesses who testified to Marcus's integrity. He presented phone records showing Leah had called her father 14 times in the month before the incident. Calls that lasted only seconds, like she wanted to reach out but couldn't find the words. He even brought in an expert on domestic violence who explained the psychology of why victims protect their abusers. But Derek's attorney was relentless. He pointed out that Marcus had kicked in the door without permission. He emphasized that Marcus had continued to strike Derek even after he was down. He showed photos of Derek's injuries, graphic images that made the jury wince. This wasn't self-defense, Derek's attorney declared. This was revenge. This was a father who took the law into his own hands and nearly killed a man. By the time closing arguments were finished, no one knew which way this case would go. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The verdict. Judge Patricia Holloway had been on the bench for over 2 decades. She was known for being fair, firm, and never hesitating to deliver justice. So when she called the courtroom to order and prepared to announce her decision, everyone expected a swift conclusion. But something happened that no one saw coming. Judge Holloway looked down at her notes. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Derek. And then she looked at Leah, who was sitting in the gallery, her face buried in her hands. "I've presided over hundreds of cases in my career," Judge Holloway began. "Cases involving theft, fraud, violence, and everything in between. But this case is different." The courtroom was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The evidence presented here tells 2 stories. On one hand, we have a father who believed his daughter was in danger and acted to protect her. On the other hand, we have a man who was hospitalized for 3 days due to injuries inflicted by the defendant. Judge Holloway paused, her voice heavy with emotion. The law is clear on the use of force. Self-defense must be proportional. But the law is not always equipped to handle the gray areas of human behavior. The law does not account for a father's love. The law does not account for years of silent suffering. The law does not account for the terror in a daughter's eyes when she's too afraid to tell the truth. She removed her glasses and rubbed her temples. "I have reviewed the evidence. I have listened to the testimony, and I have to be honest with this court. The decision is not obvious to me." Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus's mother clutched her chest. Derek's family looked confused, almost angry. "I am taking a 48-hour recess to further consider this verdict. I want to make it clear that this is not a decision I make lightly. The stakes are too high. The consequences are too permanent. And I refuse to deliver a judgment I'm not certain is just. The gavel came down, and the courtroom exploded into chaos. Those 48 hours felt like an eternity. For Marcus, every minute was agony. He sat in his living room, staring at old photos of Leah as a child, wondering if he had ruined everything by trying to save her. For Derek, it was a waiting game, a chance to prepare for whatever came next. And for Leah, it was a reckoning. Because during that recess, something changed. Leah came forward. She walked into the courthouse the morning of the verdict with dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands. But there was something different about her, something stronger. She asked to speak to Judge Holloway privately before the verdict was announced. No one knows exactly what was said in that meeting. But when court reconvened, Judge Holloway's demeanor had shifted. Before I announce my verdict, I want to acknowledge that new information has come to light. Information that was previously withheld due to fear. Everyone looked at Leah. She was crying, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was sitting up straight, her eyes locked on her father. After extensive consideration and in light of this new testimony, I find the defendant, Marcus Webb, not guilty on the charge of aggravated assault. Marcus collapsed, not from relief, but from the weight of everything he had been carrying. His mother screamed in joy. His friends embraced each other. But Marcus just sat there, tears streaming down his face, looking at his daughter. Leah walked over to him slowly. She knelt down beside him and took his hands. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I didn't tell the truth sooner." Marcus shook his head, pulling her into his arms. "You have nothing to apologize for." "Nothing. I would do it all over again. I would do it 1,000 times. And in that moment, watching a father and daughter hold each other in a courtroom that had nearly torn them apart, you realize what this case was really about. It wasn't about assault. It wasn't about legal technicalities. It was about the lengths a parent will go to protect their child. It was about the silence that abuse demands and the courage it takes to break it. It was about a judge who refused to rush justice because she understood that sometimes the truth needs time to surface. So let me ask you this. If you were in Marcus's shoes, what would you have done? If you heard your child screaming for help behind a locked door, would you have waited for the police? Would you have walked away? And if you were Leah, living in fear, trapped by someone who was supposed to love you, how long would it take you to find your voice? This case didn't have an easy answer. That's why the judge hesitated. That's why she took her time. Because justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's painful. And sometimes it requires us to look beyond the law and into the hearts of the people standing before us. Marcus Webb walked out of that courtroom a free man. But more importantly, he walked out with his daughter by his side. Leah eventually pressed charges against Derek, and he's currently awaiting trial for domestic violence. And as for Judge Patricia Holloway, she said something after the verdict that I think we should all remember. The courtroom is a place of law, but it should also be a place of humanity. We must never forget that behind every case there are real people with real pain. And our job is not just to judge, but to understand. If this story moved you, think about sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, there's another Leah who's too scared to speak. Another Marcus who would give anything to protect the people he loves. And maybe, just maybe, this story will remind them that the truth always finds a way to come out. And that courage, even when it comes late, is still courage.